19th, Thursday, March 19th, 2026. It is 9:52 a.m. and I'm just doing another read aloud because, again, if you all are subscribed to my channel, you know that I do a lot of read aloud, and I read aloud by myself every single day through housework, through business work, through any type of work. I always find time to read. And so I promote this a lot because reading is so important. It's so valuable for everyone. And reading has diminished in so many ways over the past 30, 40 years, has diminished much more in the last 20 years, I shall say, in my opinion. And so, with that being said, being that I read aloud anyway and I deal with the baby and do all of these other things, I figure why not read aloud with you all as well, because it does me no harm. All right. So all my flaws are always included in my read alouds. There's no editing involved. There's just here on a live and doing what I do every single day, throughout the day, with every other thing else when I'm not on the live doing live. Of course, I'm watching the baby and the baby's driving me nuts and everything else. But anywho's, we are in. So take it as kind of like a little class. If you're jumping into the live, if you feel like jumping into class, learning some history, learning something you may not know about, jump in. If you don't catch it in the moment, you can always catch it later on. I make sure that it's public so everybody can see. And everybody is welcome. It doesn't matter class, color, or creed. Everybody's welcomed here. All righty. So we are in Be Free or Die by Cate Lineberryl. That's spelled Cate with a C, not a K. And we are still in chapter 6, North and South. We're going to pick up on page 124. And we'll take sporadic breaks between certain parts of the reading until we finish the chapter. And if I'm able to, I'll continue into the next chapter. If not, I'll see you guys a little bit later on in the day and do another live reading. Okay, so we shall start. And again, I thank you all for being here. The McClellan arrived in New York City 2 days later. When Smalls and Hannah emerged from the steamer, they were in awe of the city. Nearly everywhere they looked, they saw buildings, residents, uniformed soldiers, and horse-drawn carriages as the city bustled with business from the war. Charleston's population was about 40,000, but New York City's stood at more than 800,000. Many were recent European immigrants, but a little more than 12,000 were free blacks. Both groups often lived in overcrowded tenements and competed for the same jobs, while tensions between them simmered. Less than a year later, in July 1863, these tensions would explode in the New York draft riots. Rioters, many of whom were Irish immigrants, were angry that blacks, who were not yet considered citizens, were exempt from the draft, while wealthy whites would pay $300 to get out of their duty. During the 4-day riot, the mob would target black men in particular. More than 100 African Americans would be killed. At least 11 men would be lynched. When Smalls arrived in September 1862, the city was already divided by the war. I'll go ahead and take a quick pause there. And you all know that I always have my baby Victor in the background as co-host. But in this, let me give you all the quick warning. He's getting tired for his morning nap. We wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So he's getting tired. He's getting frustrated. And he's wiggling around trying to go to sleep. So if you hear him hustling and bustling and screaming the word "ba," he's probably screaming out for his bottle, which I have right here while I'm reading. But I just want to give you all the warning so you don't think I'm being unprofessional. But I do my classes in my home. I don't have a school classroom. I don't have a lecture room. I just have me and my desk and my book and my children and my things and my husband. Anyways, okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue. So anyways, some vehemently opposed. Welcome, John. Welcome. Good morning. Some vehemently opposed slavery and had organized against it, but many New Yorkers sympathized with the South. It was not just working class whites who feared competition from blacks for jobs. It was also those who had made large fortunes from manufacturing textiles and clothing and did not want to lose access to the South's cotton. New York ties to the South were so great that in early January 1861, a few weeks after South Carolina seceded, the mayor of New York City had proposed that the metropolis secede too. His plan, which was never realized, was for the city to form an independent commonwealth made up of Long Island, Staten Island, and Manhattan Island so it could continue to do business with the slave-holding South. Reverend French and Smalls began their fundraising efforts almost immediately after arriving in New York. Although the climate was hostile at times, the antagonism, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, the antagonism brewing beneath the surface did not seem to affect them. Smalls would be kept so busy in New York that he would not return to Port Royal for more than 7 weeks, far longer than DuPont had hoped and Smalls had promised. And if you all are just jumping in, we're on page 125. We're in chapter 6 of Be Free or Die by Cate Lineberry. We are in chapter 6 called North and South, page 125, down closer to the end of the page. Welcome, John, again. Good morning and blessings to you and family, Mr. John. So one of French's and Small's first talks in New York was at the Church of the Puritans. On the night of the event, people crammed together in the aisles to make room for the large crowd. French spoke for 2 hours about the Port Royal experiment before Smalls gave his account of his escape. He spoke with ease and confidence. The nerves that had rattled him in Washington during his first speaking engagement seemed to have vanished, and his natural talent for storytelling mesmerized the audience. At the conclusion of Small's speech, French introduced Hannah and the children, along with 4 other people who had escaped slavery, including a Charleston couple who had hidden in rice casks. That's spelled cask, spelled C-A-S-K-S. C-A-S-K-S. The evening was considered a grand success as contributions flowed in and the crowd embraced its guest. We'll go ahead and take a quick break, or maybe a couple minutes. Grab your tea, do what you got to do. How about we call it less than 5 minutes and we will return. I'll tend to baby real quick. I'll go ahead and get my tea warmed up. And if you all decide to subscribe, I urge you all to do so. But if you choose to do so, I thank you all so very, very much. Go grab, do whatever you got to do. We'll return shortly. And if you don't have a pen and paper nearby, maybe you should grab one. So if you hear any important points, factual information, you all can jot it down maybe for something in the future. Thank you all so very much. We'll be back shortly. We will return in less than about 3 minutes. All right, we are back. We are on page 126. We'll go ahead and roll into 126. I went ahead and I put the T on already. The baby is half settled, but not really. He's still tired, probably going to go to sleep soon. But we're going to go ahead and continue reading, of course. I thank you all for hanging out. That's what I do every day anyway. I just decided to make sure that I'm on live, so other folks may want to hear what I'm reading aloud every single day. Reading so many different books. Anyways, right now we are in Be Free or Die, chapter 6, North and South. We're on page 126. The book is by Mrs. Cate Lineberry. Smalls, his family, and French were still in New York fundraising on September 22nd when Lincoln issued his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which would go into effect on January 1st if the Confederate States had not seized the rebellion. As Smalls and Hannah celebrated the news, they must have been reminded of their own journey to freedom and all the opportunities that had already come with it. Maybe I should have finished my tea before I came back on. Bear with me one moment. I'll be back in less than 2 minutes. You all bear with me. Okay, instead of going to finish my tea, I end up changing the baby. Anyways, changing the baby's diaper. TMI. Anyway, back to reading. My tea is almost ready. I hope you all got your tea. But my tea, I think, is almost ready. Well, it's still boiling a little bit here. So, already had some bacon and bread this morning for breakfast. Anyways, hopefully the baby will let me continue reading without interrupting too much, and then you guys don't have to hear us cries too much in the background. He's getting used to this now. Anyways, I'll multitask, do my tea, and read all at the same time. So back up at the top again, page 126. Smalls' family and French was still in New York fundraising on September 22nd when Lincoln issued his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which would go into effect on January 1st if the Confederate States had not seized the rebellion. As Smalls and Hannah celebrated the news, they must have been reminded of their own journey to freedom and all the opportunities that had already come with it. Now, shortly, he's trying to grab the butter here. Shortly after the proclamation was published, Lincoln addressed supporters from the White House balcony, quote, "I can only trust in God. I have made no mistake. It is now for the country and the world to pass judgment on it," end quote. Many in the country cheered, others seethed with anger at the announcement. Horace Greeley's New York Tribune printed, quote, "God bless Abraham Lincoln," end quote, on its front page, while the Louisville Journal wrote, quote, "The measure is woefully unwarrantable and woefully pernicious," end quote. Saxton, who had returned from his respite to Port Royal, was, of course, overjoyed. The proclamation left no doubt that the formerly enslaved people under his charge would be legally free in January when it went into effect. Saxton wrote, quote, "The glorious proclamation of our honored president comes like a gleam of sunlight through the darkness which has enveloped us, bidding us to be of good cheer," end quote. Despite the good news, the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation would not help the Black families in Port Royal who needed support, and French and Smalls continued their tour to Philadelphia to help raise money. Now I'm going to take my tea off here now before it scorches. I'm drinking British English tea, by the way. Yorkshire. All right, continuing. Philadelphia was another busy northern city whose economy, like New York's, was thriving from the war. It was the second largest city in the country after New York, with a population of about 600,000. Blacks numbered about 22,000, giving Philadelphia the largest African-American population of any northern city. So that will be something that I would notate, listeners. Blacks numbered about 22,000, giving Philadelphia the largest African-American population of any northern city. Okay. Now, like New York, Philadelphia had close ties to the South before the war. The southern states sent lumber, turpentine, and cotton north, and Philadelphia sent south a variety of items from clothing to carriages. But once the war began, the city developed strong anti-Southern sentiments. Even so, the city of brotherly love, known as a leader in the anti-slavery movement, did not always look upon African Americans with favor. In fact, many considered it the most segregated and racist city north of Baltimore. Frederick Douglass wrote in 1862, quote, "There is not perhaps anywhere to be found a city in which prejudice against color is more rampant than in Philadelphia," end quote. Despite the prejudice of some Philadelphians, the city embraced Smalls during his visit, which included a speech at the National Hall on Market Street. The night Smalls arrived, the city's district attorney, George A. Coffey, introduced him to several prominent citizens. Another admirer of Smalls declared, quote, "I would rather vote for this man Smalls for president than for any Democrat in the land," end quote. In late September, Smalls, Hannah, and the children went back to New York, while French returned to Port Royal. Both French and C.C. Lee, another officer of the National Freedmen's Relief Association, had written to DuPont, asking permission to keep Smalls away from his duties for a little longer. But by the time the letter arrived, DuPont did not have time to respond and, quote, was not pleased, end quote, when Smalls did not return with French to resume his piloting duties. The Rear Admiral had no choice, however, but to wait patiently for Smalls to return. We'll take a quick 1 to 2 minute break and we shall return and pick up Smalls remain busy on his second trip to New York. I shall return. Thank you all for listening. All right, we are back. If you all are just jumping in, we are in the book Be Free or Die by Miss Cate Lineberry, spelled C-A-T-E, Cate Lineberry. We are in chapter 6, North and South. We are picking up in 127. Got baby Victor here in the background as co-host, and I finally prepared my tea, you all. For those of you still hanging out in the room, I appreciate you being here, and blessings to everyone that is here listening, learning something new. Grab your pen and paper so you can write down factual information as we go along with the reading. And again, I read aloud every day, all day. So I do this as something just to be extra, but I think that it helps a lot of people from the comments that I get and the messages that I receive. So that's wonderful. It's great because we need to get back into reading what's reading and not just scrolling through our phones. Even if it's just to listen while you're cleaning, you're learning something. It's good to continue to learn. And as we get older, it's important. It's essential to continue learning. You never stop learning. None of us are perfect. We will never know anything. Everything is what I meant to say. And we shall leave this earth without knowing everything. And that is okay. Just so you all know, if you didn't know. So like my mom would say back in the days, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Yeah, man, check yourself before you wreck yourself, because now these days, a lot of people are putting on the books and picking up more of the phones, and it needs to change because people are losing it, shall I say. Their brain is somewhere else while their body maintains right here. Right? I'm sure that many of you may agree. All right, so continuing. Picking up on page 127. Smalls remained busy on his second trip to New York. One of his most significant events was held on October 2nd. He was, quote, received with deafening cheers, end quote, by members of New York's African-American community who had packed themselves into Shiloh Presbyterian Church to celebrate him. After prayers, speeches, and songs, including, quote, John Brown's Body, end quote, and, quote, there's a better time a-coming, end quote, Smalls was presented with a large gold medal. One side depicted Charleston Harbor with the planter headed toward Fort Sumter and the Union fleet. The other side was inscribed, quote, presented to Robert Smalls by the colored people of New York, October 2nd, 1862, as a token of their regard for his heroism, his love of liberty, and his patriotism, end quote. Smalls was moved by the accolades and the gift, and what was described as a, quote, very modest and touching address, end quote. He recounted the details of his escape from Charleston and hoped that he would one day lead the Union into Charleston Harbor. But even as many cheered for him, Smalls was reminded that the racism of some in the North was equal to that of any Southerners, and with that hatred often came violence. The New York Tribune reported the next day that rowdies had assaulted one man near the church and that a planned riot had been foiled because the instigators had started their attack before the meeting adjourned. And now I have to find something before I continue here with you all to entertain this child, because as y'all know, when he's ready to act a fool, he's going to act a fool. Bear with me one moment, you all. I'll return in just 1 minute. And welcome KODJKGV to the room. I thank you all. Blessings to you and family. I will return in less than 1 minute to pick up. All right, you all, picking up. So where I had ended there was the instigators had started their attack before the meeting adjourned. The South, too, was unhappy with Smalls' growing fame. When Confederate newspapers became aware of Smalls' speaking tour and the reception he was getting, they sharply criticized the North for glorifying him. All right. If you all are just joining in, we're on page 128 now. We're in chapter 6 of North and South. We're in the book Be Free or Die by Cate Lineberryl with a C, Cate. Smalls and his family finally returned to Port Royal in late October and soon learned that the South's anger at an enslaved man's making his escape by taking a Confederate ship had not abated. He was still a wanted man. At least one attempt was made to seize Smalls shortly after he returned, when a group of men arrived in Beaufort and inquired about the location of Smalls's house. Someone raised an alarm and Union soldiers were able to capture the group. Smalls refused to be intimidated. However, and quickly returned to resume his duties as a pilot for the Union. But he found the Union facing another threat equal to that of the Confederates, yellow fever. An outbreak had started at headquarters at Hilton Head about a week before Smalls returned to the area. At the time, doctors were still unaware that mosquitoes spread yellow fever, also known as yellow jack. Some even speculated that the cause of this latest epidemic had been the turning of dirt for new fortifications at Hilton Head. Since the beginning of the war, the Union had feared the toll that warm climate diseases such as yellow fever and malaria would take on its soldiers fighting in the South. When Hunter became commander of the Department of the South in the spring of 1862, he gave specific directives for his soldiers to follow during the hot summer months. This included rising shortly after sunrise, receiving, quote, quinine in prophylactic doses, each dose combined with half a gill of whiskey, end quote, during the hottest hours of the day and enjoying, quote, good cooking, end quote. He also recommended fishing in the early morning and at night. Hunter believed that if they followed these rules and maintained good hygiene, the soldiers would have nothing to fear. These precautions, of course, failed to save many men, including Major General Ormsby Mitchell from the bites of infected mosquitoes. Ormsby had replaced Hunter as commander, as commander of the Department of the South in early September 1862. Brigadier General John Milton Brannan was briefly in charge between Hunter and Mitchell. At the beginning of the outbreak, Mitchell had moved his staff from Hilton Head to Beaufort. 5 days later, he succumbed to the disease. We'll take a quick break and then we'll move into page 130. We are in North and South, chapter 6 of the book Be Free or Die by Cate Lineberryl. We will return in less than 1 minute. I thank you all for hanging out and listening. All right, continuing here on page 130, on October 31st, the day after Mitchell died, Smalls ran into DuPont and another Union officer, Captain John Rogers, in Beaufort. Smalls had not seen DuPont since his return. The two Union officers had arrived by boat from Port Royal that morning to serve as pallbearers at Mitchell's funeral. Rogers must have shared DuPont's concern about the effect on Smalls of his trip to the North, and Rogers patronizingly asked Smalls if his head had been turned by the attention he had received. Smalls' reaction was as calm as it was brilliant. DuPont reported that Smalls replied it was turned one way all the time he was north towards Port Royal. Now, I'm going to take a quick pause there because I believe my garbage just arrived, the garbage people. So if the dog barks in the background, I do apologize. Pre-apologize for the noise just in case. But he probably knows it's the garbage people, so he might not bark. She might not bark. Anywho's. Smalls was using his charm and diplomatic skills, but he was also sincere in his efforts to help the Union in whatever way he could. Now, as a free man, he and his family could easily have stayed in the North rather than return to the South, where the hefty bounty hung over his head and threatened his life. Soon after Smalls' return, he learned that the planter was no longer under the Navy's control. While Smalls was away, DuPont had turned the planter over to the Army's Quartermaster Corps because of the Navy's difficulty in supplying the vessel with the wood it needed for fuel. Without access to the planter, Smalls probably was piloting other vessels for the Navy. Smalls was ambitious and now had some money, so it was not surprising that he also found a way to own a store for freedmen during this time. Okay, even though property was not for sale in occupied Beaufort. The formerly enslaved men and women were earning money as part of the Port Royal experiment and needed supplies, and Small's store provided them. He was soon making a large weekly profit. But for Smalls, financial success was not enough, and his patriotism and commitment to ending slavery was evident in a story Saxton told about him at a November celebration in Beaufort. On that clear fall day, hundreds of former slaves, along with white plantation superintendents and missionaries, had packed themselves into a Baptist church in the middle of a grove of live oaks. The reason for the gathering was to honor the continued success of the Port Royal experiment and the new regiment of black soldiers Stanton had authorized Saxton to create. The regiment, which was named the 1st South Carolina Volunteer Infantry Regiment, incorporated the men from Hunter's Regiment who had been furloughed and those he had kept underarms. Anyways, the rest of the regiment, which was headquartered at the former John Joyner Smith plantation on the Beaufort River, was made up of new recruits from Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina, and would soon number 600. Saxton had set aside that November day as one of, quote, Thanksgiving and praise, end quote. It will be another year before Lincoln issued his Thanksgiving proclamation, dedicating the last Thursday of November as a holiday. Until then, the celebration had been observed mostly in New England and other northern states, and usually on different dates. Notate that, you all. Some people don't know that about Thanksgiving, but yes, it was only observed mostly in New England and other northern states, and usually on different dates, not always the last Thursday of November. The Thanksgiving festivities in Beaufort included the singing of the spiritual, quote, Roll, Jordan, Roll, unquote, followed by a sermon and a speech given by Saxton encouraging young black men to enlist in the new regiment. Saxton tried to further inspire the crowd that had packed the church by discussing the bravery of the regiment's white leader, I believe it's Colonel, right? T.W. Higginson, a radical abolitionist and Unitarian minister from Massachusetts. Saxton also shared a story about Smalls. When Smalls had come to see Saxton the day before, Saxton, flipping pages now, going over to page 132, had asked about his store was faring, and Smalls told him that he was making, quote, $50 a week sometimes, end quote. It was a large amount of money by anyone's standards, but Smalls wanted something more. He told Saxton that instead of continuing with the store, he was going to enlist as a private in Saxton's new black regiment. The news came as a surprise to Saxton, particularly since Smalls was doing so well. When Saxton asked him why, Smalls displayed the patriotism and courage for which he had become known. He replied, quote, How can I expect to keep my freedom unless I fight for it? Suppose the secession should come back here. What good would my $50 do me then? Yes, sir. I should enlist if I were making $1,000 a week. Bear with me. I had to go grab baby real quick because, baby's walking now. Keep up with him. Continuing. By sharing the story with the audience, Saxton hoped to encourage even more young black men to join. Smalls was a hero to many across the country, and especially to African Americans in Port Royal, and his willingness to join would surely motivate others. Charlotte 14. It's Charlotte Forten, not 14. Charlotte Forten, Forten, the first African American teacher from the North to arrive in the South to help the former slaves, was there that day and found Saxton's speech stirring and thought it would, quote, prove very effective, end quote. The early success of the regiment was also likely to inspire young men to join. By the time of Saxton's speech, several companies of the regiment had already seen action and had proved their courage and skill beyond any question. Saxton wrote to Stanton, quote, It is admitted upon all hands that the Negroes fought with a coolness and bravery that would have done credit to veteran soldiers. There was no excitement, no flinching, no attempt at cruelty when successful. They seemed like men who were fighting to vindicate their manhood, and they did it well, end quote. Despite Small's interest in joining the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, he ultimately did not enlist in the regiment. Smalls may have decided that he could be more effective as a pilot, or DuPont may have convinced Smalls of how desperately his skills were needed in the Navy. A few months later, DuPont would put Smalls' considerable talents into action in the First Battle of Charleston. All right, folks. Now we are to chapter 7, the Keokuk. And chapter 7 is page 134 to, I'll tell you now, to, 1 second, baby, to 151. So we probably won't get into that now, but when I do jump on live a little bit later again, I'll go ahead and jump back into Become What You Are by Mr. Alan Watts. So I'll see you guys a little bit later, maybe around a lunchtime-ish, 1 o'clock, maybe before 2, maybe. And we'll go into Become What You Are. It's a wonderful book. I started yesterday in it, sharing it with you all. I read a lot of books every day at once, parts out of each book. And so not all of them I'm able to share with you all, because sometimes I have to set up the live and do all this and do all that, which I do it very simply. But when I got all these things going on, sometimes it's not that simple sometimes. But anywho, I'm glad you all sat in for the reading. Catch me a little bit later. Subscribe if you haven't yet, if you wish to do so only. And if you enjoy reading, please subscribe. I invite you. If you enjoy books, if you enjoy reading, if you enjoy history, subscribe, man. You don't miss out on anything. It's free to do. And then later on, we'll jump right back into, like yesterday, Become What You Are. And I hope you all join me for that live reading session. You all have a beautiful and blessed day. Take care, family, now. And ration your foods.